30,000 feet up, a veteran flight attendant threatens an emergency landing over a stubborn passenger in 2A. He won't buckle up. She won't back down. In moments, her career, his identity, and the ownership of this jet collide because she just challenged Keanu Reeves without knowing it is his jet. What happens when truth hits the cabin? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The jet trembled as it sliced through a turbulent patch of sky over the Rockies. Coffee cups rattled on their trays, and the cabin lights flickered once, casting quick flashes of silver across the leather seats. Flight attendant Rachel Miller braced herself against the galley counter, her knuckles white around the handle of the service cart. She had handled storms before, literal and emotional, but something about this moment felt different. Her eyes locked on seat 2A, where a tall, dark-haired man sat calmly, completely unbothered by the turbulence. His seatbelt light was glowing bright amber above him, but the strap across his lap hung loose. Every other passenger had fastened theirs without question, yet he remained unmoved, his attention buried in a worn notebook spread across his knees. The arrogance of it made Rachel's pulse rise. She took a breath and stepped down the narrow aisle, her voice firm but polite. "Sir, the captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. I need you to fasten yours immediately." No response. The engines roared louder as the jet dipped slightly, and Rachel steadied herself on a seatback. She tried again, louder this time. "Sir, for your safety, please buckle your seatbelt. We're in a severe turbulence zone." The man in 2A didn't even glance up. His pen moved slowly over the page, his expression distant, thoughtful. He looked like he was somewhere else, entirely. Rachel felt a rush of irritation crawl up her neck. In her 18 years of flying, she had encountered billionaires, celebrities, and politicians who thought the rules didn't apply to them. But this was a private charter, and that meant no exceptions. She stepped closer, her shoes steady against the carpeted aisle, and leaned slightly forward. "Sir," she said, her tone clipped now, "if you refuse to comply with safety regulations, I'll have no choice but to contact the pilot. We'll land immediately, and you'll be removed from the aircraft." That made him pause. Slowly, the man looked up. For a split second, Rachel's breath caught. His eyes were calm, almost too calm, like still water that hid something deep beneath the surface. There was no anger, no arrogance, only quiet surprise. Then, he smiled faintly, a gesture so unexpected, it disarmed her completely. He set down his pen and, without saying a word, clicked the seatbelt into place. Rachel blinked, thrown off by the simplicity of his compliance. She had expected resistance or sarcasm, not silent obedience. She nodded briskly, turning to walk back toward the galley. Her heart was pounding harder than it should have. Something about the man unsettled her, not because he'd been rude, but because he hadn't. It was as if she had walked into a storm expecting thunder and lightning, but found only quiet rain. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a mistake, one that would echo far beyond this flight. The aircraft jolted again, and a gasp rippled through the small cabin. Rachel steadied herself against the seats, the muscles in her arms tightening as another wave of turbulence rocked the jet. Over the hum of the engines, she could hear the faint clinking of glassware from the galley, the vibration of the fuselage, and the muted rustle of nervous passengers adjusting in their seats. Her heart was still racing from the exchange. She replayed it in her mind, her tone, her words, the look on the passenger's face when he finally complied. It had been controlled, yes, but forceful. Too forceful, maybe. But what choice had she really had? Safety rules weren't suggestions, they were non-negotiable. She'd seen firsthand what could happen when someone ignored them. Once, years ago, a man had refused to buckle up during turbulence. The aircraft dropped suddenly, just a few hundred feet, but it was enough to throw him upward into the overhead panel. He hadn't died, but the memory of the blood and the screams still haunted her. She had sworn never to let that happen on her watch again. But this man, this calm, unreadable man in seat 2A, wasn't like the others. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her when she threatened to have the captain land. Not arrogance, not anger, just quiet understanding, as if he knew something she didn't. That faint smile of his lingered in her mind, like an afterimage burned into her vision. She tried to distract herself by checking on the other passengers. Most were regulars, executives, entrepreneurs, travelers who paid for comfort and discretion. They didn't cause trouble. They didn't like attention. And yet, here she was, shaking with adrenaline because of one unassuming man who hadn't even raised his voice. Her junior attendant, Emily, peeked out from the forward cabin with wide eyes. "You okay?" she mouthed. Rachel nodded, forcing a small smile, but her pulse hadn't slowed. She turned to check the passenger again. He was gazing out the window now, his notebook closed, his seatbelt securely fastened. The hint of a tired smile touched his face as sunlight broke through the clouds, casting soft gold over his features. He didn't look like a troublemaker. He didn't look like someone who would file a complaint or cause a scene. But that only made it worse, because the quiet ones were unpredictable. Rachel took a slow breath, straightened her uniform, and made her way back toward the galley. The turbulence had eased, but her thoughts hadn't. Every instinct told her that she might have just stepped into something far bigger than a simple safety reminder. She didn't yet know that the man she'd scolded in seat 2A wasn't just another passenger. She didn't know that her words, spoken in a rush of duty and fear, were directed at someone who could end her career or completely change it before the plane ever touched the ground. The turbulence subsided, replaced by an uneasy calm. The engine's low hum filled the silence that lingered after the confrontation. Rachel stood near the galley, staring at her reflection in the stainless steel cabinet door. Her cheeks were flushed, her breathing shallow. She'd faced worse situations, mid-air, medical emergencies, drunk passengers, even engine malfunctions, but something about this felt different. It wasn't just tension. It was the feeling that she'd crossed an invisible line. She forced herself to refocus. Routine, she reminded herself. Go through the checklist. Service the cabin. Keep moving. That was how she survived long flights and long years. She took a tray of bottled water and moved quietly through the aisle. When she reached seat 2A, she hesitated. The man sat peacefully, eyes half closed, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. His face seemed familiar, but she couldn't place where she had seen it before. There was a quietness about him, a centered calm that contrasted with the chaos around him. "Would you like some water, sir?" she asked softly, her tone now careful, measured. He opened his eyes. They were deep brown, kind but distant, as if they'd seen more than he let on. "Thank you," he said, taking the bottle gently from her hand. His voice was calm, warm, almost soothing. "You handled that well," he added after a moment, catching her off guard. Rachel blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry? You did your job," he said simply. "Not everyone would have had the courage to do that." The words lingered between them like a strange kind of truce. Rachel nodded, trying to hide her surprise. Most passengers resented authority, especially when corrected mid-flight, but he seemed genuinely sincere. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. He gave a small nod and turned back to the window. The clouds below glowed golden white, spreading endlessly toward the horizon. His gaze softened as if he were somewhere else, entirely far from this plane, far from the confrontation that had just taken place. Rachel moved down the aisle again, pretending to check on other passengers, but her mind wouldn't let go of him. Something about his composure unnerved her. People who carried power often did so loudly, through words or wealth or demands. But this man, he carried it in silence. The kind of silence that commanded attention without asking for it. In the cockpit, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, advising the cabin to remain seated for another 10 minutes until clear air was confirmed. Rachel nodded automatically, but found herself glancing back at seat 2A again. The man was still staring out the window, still calm, still unbothered. She didn't know that the same man she had just disciplined, quiet, polite, unreadable, was not a typical passenger. not a wealthy client or a corporate executive. He was Keanu Reeves. And worse yet, this very jet belonged to him. By the time Rachel realized the truth, it would already be too late to undo what she'd said. Rachel Miller had been flying for almost 2 decades, and she had learned that the air itself could tell stories. Some flights hummed with calm, others with tension. She could feel it before takeoff, the way other people sensed the weather. This morning, the air had carried a heaviness she couldn't name. She had started her career at 24, fresh out of training, working cramped commercial flights, filled with crying babies, jet-lagged tourists, and demanding business travelers. She had learned patience the hard way, one spilled coffee and one complaint at a time. Over the years, she'd earned her reputation for precision and composure. When younger flight attendants panicked, Rachel stayed calm. When others looked the other way, she enforced the rules. She never cut corners, never raised her voice, and never forgot that 30,000 feet was no place for mistakes. But that kind of discipline came at a cost. 18 years of long nights, jet lag, missed holidays, and smiling through fatigue had worn her down. Her reflection in the mirror that morning had told the story clearly. Dark circles, fine lines, and eyes that looked tired even when she smiled. Private aviation had promised more comfort, better pay, and fewer passengers. But it also brought a different kind of exhaustion. The quiet pressure of dealing with powerful people who thought rules were for everyone but them. Rachel had handled them all. Tech billionaires who wanted to smoke cigars in pressurized cabins. Reality stars who brought dogs the size of toddlers. A foreign prince who once asked her to adjust the temperature every 5 minutes until landing. Through it all, she remained professional, the kind of attendant managers trusted and passengers respected at least. Most of them did. She prided herself on keeping order, especially when things got rough. And that afternoon, as turbulence rocked the jet over the jagged peaks of the Rockies, she felt the shift immediately. The seat belt light flicked on with a soft chime. She made her way down the aisle, checking each passenger, 4 in total, all experienced flyers, who complied without hesitation. All except one. Seat 2A. A man sat there, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing simple clothes, a faded black t-shirt, and jeans that looked far too ordinary for this kind of flight. His dark hair fell loosely to his neck, and his hands rested on a small, worn leather notebook. He was writing something, slow and deliberate. His posture relaxed, despite the turbulence shaking the cabin. He didn't seem to notice her approach. Rachel stopped at his seat, gripping the edge of a headrest to steady herself as the plane dipped. "Sir," she said, keeping her tone warm and professional. "The captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. I need you to fasten your belt until we clear the turbulence." He gave a faint nod without looking up, his pen still moving. Rachel hesitated, waiting for the sound of the buckle click, but it never came. The aircraft jolted again, harder this time. Rachel gripped the armrest of the nearest seat as the cart behind her rattled. The passenger in 2A barely reacted. His pen didn't pause, his expression unchanged, as though the turbulence were nothing more than a faint vibration. Rachel's patience, stretched thin after a long morning of delays and demanding clients, began to fray. She leaned closer, raising her voice over the sound of the engines. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist that you buckle your seatbelt now. It's for your safety." Still, nothing. He didn't even glance up. His calmness wasn't rude. It was worse. It was dismissive, like she wasn't even there. She caught a glimpse of the page he was writing on. The handwriting was careful, flowing. Not business notes, not a checklist, something personal. She couldn't see the words clearly, but it looked like a letter. She straightened, forcing down her frustration. She had been trained to remain professional no matter the circumstance. But there was a limit, and this man was walking dangerously close to it. Her job was to maintain safety, not to coddle arrogance. "Sir," she said again, firmer this time, "you need to fasten your seatbelt immediately. We're entering severe turbulence. This is not optional." At last, he paused. The pen froze mid-sentence, and his eyes lifted slowly toward her. For a heartbeat, Rachel forgot what she was about to say. His expression wasn't angry, it was calm, unreadable. There was something disarming about the stillness in his face, like he carried a kind of peace she didn't understand. Then, without a word, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, but instead of reaching for the seatbelt, he returned to his writing. Rachel's jaw tightened. Her heart began to pound. She thought about the regulations, the fines, the lawsuits that could arise if someone got hurt on her watch. She thought about the headlines she'd read over. The years, turbulence injures passenger after ignoring crew instructions. She refused to be responsible for one more of those stories. The plane dipped suddenly, and she felt the drop in her stomach like falling through a trapdoor. Gasps erupted from other passengers. The seatbelt sign flickered again. That was it. Rachel moved forward, her voice now sharp and commanding, the tone she used when panic needed to be replaced with authority. "Sir," she said, standing close enough for him to hear every word clearly, "you have been asked twice. If you don't comply immediately, I will inform the captain and we will land this aircraft. Now, buckle your seatbelt." The man looked up again, his eyes meeting hers directly for the first time. They were dark, gentle, but strong in a way that made her falter. There was no defiance there, only quiet curiosity, as if he were studying her reaction rather than resisting her order. He didn't speak. Rachel held his gaze, refusing to back down. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them, low and steady, like a test of wills. Rachel could feel the eyes of other passengers turning toward her. She hated making a scene, but she hated being ignored even more. Rules were rules, and she'd built her entire career on enforcing them fairly, no matter who was in the seat. The plane dipped again, just enough to make the overhead bins creak. Rachel's patience finally snapped. She reached forward and tapped the man's shoulder, not gently. "Sir, this is not a request," she said, her voice cutting through the cabin. "Fasten your seatbelt now, or I'll have the pilot turn us around." That finally broke his focus. The pen stilled, his hand lowered. Slowly, he looked up at her, and their eyes locked again. The expression on his face wasn't irritation or anger. It was compassion. That unexpected softness made Rachel's chest tighten. He gave a small, thoughtful smile and said quietly, "You're right." Then he reached for the belt and clicked it in place with deliberate calm, the metallic snap of the buckle echoing louder than it should have. He didn't look away from her as he did it, and for a strange moment, Rachel felt her heart sink. The fight she'd been ready for never came. "Thank you," she said stiffly, stepping back, trying to regain her composure. But her cheeks burned with embarrassment. Something about his calmness made her feel foolish, as if she'd been shouting into the wind while he stood in stillness. He gave a polite nod, no sarcasm, no smugness. Then he opened the notebook again, his expression peaceful, as if nothing had happened. Rachel turned away, forcing herself to walk steadily toward the galley. Her mind raced. She replayed every word she'd said, wondering if she'd gone too far. Threatening an emergency landing wasn't routine. It was the kind of thing that ended careers if the wrong person took offense, and private jet passengers weren't known for forgiveness. She took a long breath, leaning on the counter, letting the rhythmic rumble of the engine steady her nerves. She glanced down at the passenger manifest again, the digital list glowing faintly on her tablet. The man in 2A was listed under a generic name, Charles Grant. No company, no title. That was strange. Most high-end clients came with long signatures, executives, producers, CEOs. Whoever this man was, he wasn't here under his real name. She didn't know it yet, but that name wasn't real at all. The man she had just threatened to remove from the aircraft wasn't Charles Grant. It was Keanu Reeves, flying under an alias for privacy, as he often did when traveling without entourage or fanfare. Rachel exhaled shakily, unaware of the irony that she had just enforced a rule against one of the most humble, soft-spoken men in Hollywood. And before the flight was over, that single moment would redefine her life in ways she never imagined. Keanu Reeves sat in seat 2A, his pen moving steadily across the page as the world outside the window blurred into streaks of white and gray. The turbulence barely registered. He'd flown through worse and had long since stopped fearing what he couldn't control. The hum of the jet engines created a kind of rhythm that helped him think. For Keanu, flights were one of the few places left where he could disappear. No cameras, no noise, no expectations. Just silence and motion. He wasn't traveling for business or pleasure this time. The flight from Montana had been an emotional one. 2 days earlier, he had attended a private veterans charity event, one that had meant more to him than any red carpet premiere ever could. The event honored a fallen soldier named Sergeant Daniel Harper, a man who had served alongside Keanu's late father in a humanitarian mission decades earlier. Keanu had learned about the connection only recently, through a letter sent by Harper's widow, Elena. Elena's handwriting still haunted him, graceful but trembling, like someone holding back years of grief. She had written to thank him for donating quietly to the Veterans Hospital where her husband had once volunteered, not realizing that her letter would stir something deep within him. In her words, he had felt the weight of a promise unfulfilled. Her husband had dreamed of creating a scholarship fund for veterans' children. He never lived to see it happen. Keanu had promised to finish what Daniel started. The pages of his notebook were filled with his attempts to make sense of it all. Budget notes, contacts, ideas for the scholarship's name, and a draft of the letter he planned to send to Elena once everything was finalized. His handwriting was small and careful. Every word mattered. He paused for a moment, staring at the ink. He could still see Elena's face from the ceremony in Montana, how she had smiled through tears when the folded flag was handed to her. He had stood quietly in the back, not wanting attention, only respect. That was how he preferred it. The turbulence shook the plane again, a subtle reminder of the present moment. He barely looked up. To him, the motion of the aircraft felt almost poetic. Life itself rarely stayed level for long. It rose and fell, and all one could do was remain steady through the changes. When the first voice came a woman's voice, he barely registered it. It sounded distant, like a faint echo in the background of his thoughts. "Sir, please fasten your seatbelt." He nodded instinctively, his mind still half-anchored in the words he'd been writing. The pen never left the page. He didn't notice her walk away. He didn't notice the second warning either. His focus was elsewhere, on a folded letter, on a widow's face, on a promise he intended to keep. Keanu's mind drifted back to the quiet Montana chapel, where the walls were lined with framed photographs of soldiers who had served, sacrificed, and vanished into memory. He remembered the soft murmur of the pastor's voice, the rustle of uniforms, the trembling hands of Elena Harper as she accepted the folded flag. He hadn't planned to attend the event publicly, but when he read about the Harper family's financial struggles, he felt compelled to go. He'd arrived unannounced, slipping in during the second row of seats, wearing a plain black jacket and jeans. No entourage, no security. He had stood in silence when the names were read, a somber observer in the back of the room. When it ended, he approached Elena quietly. She hadn't recognized him at first. He was just another face offering condolences. Only later, when the local paper published photos, did she realize who had been there that day. Now, on the plane, that encounter replayed in his mind. Elena's voice had cracked when she told him that her husband used to talk about building something lasting, a scholarship for the children of veterans who couldn't afford college. She had said she didn't have the resources or strength to carry that dream alone. Her words had stayed with him like a melody that refused to fade. So Keanu had decided he would fund it himself. No publicity, no press release, just quiet action. That was how he believed things of real value should be done. He had already arranged for lawyers to handle the trust. The notebook in his hands contained drafts of personal letters he wanted to send to the families who would benefit first. It mattered to him that it felt human, not corporate. He had been rewriting one of those letters when the turbulence began. His concentration didn't break. To him, it was just noise, part of the background hum of travel. The first flight attendant's voice barely registered. He heard the words but not the tone. He nodded automatically, lost in his writing, his mind 1,000 miles away. The plane tilted slightly, and the ink on the page wavered. He steadied his hand and kept going. His attention was so buried in the letter that he didn't notice how firm her next approach sounded. Her voice cut through his thoughts again, sharper this time, commanding, urgent. "Sir, please fasten your seatbelt immediately." He blinked and looked up for a fraction of a second, seeing only a flash of movement, a uniform, a professional face. He gave another absent nod, the kind people give when they're pretending to listen while their mind is elsewhere. Then he lowered his head again. In his notebook, the ink had smeared where the plane jolted. He frowned slightly, wiping it with his thumb. That moment of distraction, the missed buckle, the smudged ink, and his quiet absorption in his thoughts was what would trigger a storm he never intended to cause. Keanu lifted his pen again, reading the unfinished sentence on the page. He had been trying to find the right words for the final paragraph of his letter to Elena Harper. He wanted it to sound sincere, but not sentimental, hopeful, but not hollow. He wrote slowly, each word weighed in silence. He wrote, "You don't owe the world forgiveness, Elena, but your husband gave it something that still lives on. His courage, his compassion, and his promise. I'll make sure that promise continues." He stopped there, staring at the words. His throat tightened. It wasn't often that something made him pause like that. He wasn't writing as an actor or as a public figure. He was writing as a man trying to keep faith with someone who had believed in doing good quietly. That kind of person was rare now. Another wave of turbulence rippled through the aircraft. A few overhead compartments rattled. A glass clinked somewhere behind him. He barely noticed. He was used to motion. Stillness, not movement, was what made him uncomfortable. The air up here felt honest. Gravity didn't fake anything. He didn't realize how much time had passed until a shadow crossed the page. The same firm voice spoke. Again, closer now. "Sir, you need to fasten your seatbelt. We're entering stronger turbulence." He looked up this time, startled slightly by the urgency in her tone. The flight attendant stood before him, composed but clearly stressed. Her brown hair was pinned neatly, her posture straight, but there was tension in her jaw. "Oh," he said softly, his voice calm. "I'm sorry. I didn't notice." He meant it, but she must not have believed him. Her eyes flashed with controlled frustration. Before he could reach for the belt, she spoke again, her voice sharper. "Sir, this is your third warning. If you don't comply, I'll have to speak to the captain." That jolted him more than the turbulence. He blinked, confused for a second, realizing she thought he was ignoring her on purpose. He opened his mouth to explain, but stopped. She looked so serious, so sure she was doing her job, that interrupting her felt wrong. Instead, he nodded, once, slowly, and reached for the quote. Belt buckle. The metal clicked into place with finality. Their eyes met for a brief moment, hers stern, his steady. Then she turned on her heel and walked back down the aisle, her professionalism unshaken. Keanu watched her go, understanding more than she might have realized. He had met people like her before, those who carried invisible weight, who took responsibility for things they didn't cause simply because no one else would. He respected that. He glanced back down at his notebook, reading over the letter again. Somewhere between the lines about duty and honor, he found himself thinking about her, about how sometimes the people enforcing the rules were the ones holding the world together when no one else was watching. He closed the notebook gently, unaware that this small misunderstanding was about to follow him far beyond this flight. The cabin was filled with a low, steady hum, the kind of white noise that usually soothed Rachel Miller after takeoff. But right now, that same hum felt suffocating. Every vibration through the floor, every distant beep from the cockpit seemed to amplify the tension in her chest. She was still standing a few feet from seat 2A, her hands trembling ever so slightly, though she kept them clasped tightly in front of her. The man hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even frowned. That almost made it worse. She had been ready for defiance, even confrontation, but not quiet compliance. When he looked up, his expression wasn't angry, it was bewildered, almost apologetic. His dark eyes seemed to study her face, as though trying to understand why she was upset. "Sir," she repeated, steadying her voice. "This is your third reminder. Fasten your seatbelt now, or I'll have to request an emergency landing." The words came out sharper than intended. They sounded rehearsed, like something pulled from a safety manual rather than spoken from instinct. But she had meant them. Protocol was protocol. The company expected nothing less than absolute enforcement of safety standards. The man blinked slowly, startled by her tone but not offended. He reached down calmly, pulled the belt across his lap, and clicked it into place. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I wasn't paying attention." The simplicity of the apology hit Rachel like a cold wave. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. He had done everything right. No attitude, no challenge, no arrogance. Just a quiet, almost embarrassed apology. And yet, as she stood there, her cheeks flushed hot with regret. The rest of the cabin had gone silent, and she could feel eyes on her. She gave a curt nod, muttered a stiff, "Thank you, sir," and turned back toward the galley, her heels clicking against the carpet. As soon as she was out of view, she exhaled shakily. Her hands found the edge of the counter, gripping it to keep from trembling. She had let her exhaustion get the better of her. 18 years of professionalism, and she had just snapped at a client in front of other passengers. She didn't know who he was, but something told her she'd made a serious mistake. He didn't act like a typical billionaire, but she'd seen enough to know that the quiet ones were often the ones who could end a career with a single phone call. Then she heard hurried footsteps behind her. It was Emily, her junior attendant, practically running from the forward cabin. Her eyes were wide, her face pale with disbelief. "Oh my God, Rachel," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. "Do you know who that is?" Rachel frowned, still trying to steady her breathing. "What are you talking about?" Emily leaned in, her voice a hushed rush of panic. "That's Keanu Reeves! You just yelled at Keanu Reeves!" For a moment, Rachel just stared at Emily, certain she'd misheard. The name didn't fit the moment, didn't fit the man in 2A, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, hunched quietly over a notebook. "What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily's eyes darted toward the cabin door, then back. "Rachel, that's Keanu Reeves. The Keanu Reeves. John Wick. The Matrix. Him. I just walked by and got a good look. It's definitely him." The color drained from Rachel's face. She leaned back against the counter, gripping it with both hands as her stomach dropped. "No," she murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. "That can't be. He's too..." She stopped herself before saying ordinary, because that was exactly what he looked like. Unassuming, quiet, normal. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more sense it made. The familiar features, the calm tone, that same soft voice she'd heard in interviews over the years. "Oh God," Rachel whispered. "Please tell me you're wrong. I wish I was." Emily replied, half in awe, half in horror. "I saw him when he came on board, but I didn't recognize him right away. He was so low-key. No assistant, no entourage, no fancy luggage. Just that leather notebook and a small duffel bag. I thought maybe he was someone's assistant or a private contractor. But it's him." Rachel pressed her palm to her forehead. "I just threatened to have Keanu Reeves removed from a flight," she said under her breath. "And not just any flight, a private charter." Emily's expression turned sympathetic, though her voice trembled with disbelief. "Yeah, and everyone in the cabin heard it. Rachel, he could complain. He could tell the company. You could get written up, maybe even suspended." Rachel's chest tightened. Her thoughts were spinning faster than she could organize them. It didn't matter that she'd followed safety regulations. It didn't matter that she was right. In private aviation, perception meant everything. You didn't embarrass high-profile passengers. You didn't scold them like children. She glanced toward the aisle, where seat 2A was still visible through the curtain. Keanu was sitting quietly, his seatbelt fastened, the notebook resting on his lap again. He looked completely at peace. "He's not acting upset," Emily whispered, following her gaze. "He's just sitting there. I don't think he's going to say anything." Rachel didn't respond. She couldn't. She had worked her entire career to build a spotless reputation. One bad interaction with someone like him, and it could all vanish. Private clients talked. One story about a disrespectful flight attendant could spread across the entire industry overnight. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She wasn't angry anymore, she was terrified. She forced herself to take a deep breath and steady her hands. "Okay," she said quietly. "No panic. Just finish the flight. Stay professional. Maybe he'll forget about it." Emily nodded, but her voice was faint. "Rachel, no one forgets something like that." Rachel's thoughts wouldn't stop racing. Every worst-case scenario flashed through her mind in quick succession: complaints, investigations, disciplinary meetings. She imagined sitting across from her supervisor, trying to explain why she had threatened to land a jet carrying one of the most beloved actors in the world. It sounded absurd even in her head. She peeked toward the aisle again. Keanu was still in 2A, quietly flipping through his notebook. His pen rested between his fingers, and his gaze was fixed on something outside the window. He didn't look angry or offended. He looked thoughtful, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. For most passengers, the silence after a confrontation would have been cold, filled with judgment or resentment. But the air around him felt calm, almost peaceful. That made it worse. His kindness was legendary, and Rachel knew it. She had read stories: him giving up subway seats, paying crew members' salaries, buying motorcycles for stuntmen. He wasn't the kind of man who made scenes, and that meant his silence could be more powerful than anger. Emily nudged her lightly. "He's not even looking this way," she whispered. "If he was upset, we'd know by now. Maybe you're okay." Rachel forced a small, uncertain nod. "Maybe," she said softly, though she didn't believe it. The turbulence subsided, and the captain announced over the intercom that they were passing through clear air. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm glow, and passengers began to relax again. Rachel busied herself with her duties, handing out drinks, checking belts, collecting cups, anything to keep her hands moving and her mind occupied. When she finally approached row 2 again, she hesitated. She didn't want to look directly at him, but she couldn't ignore him either. Professionalism demanded acknowledgement. "Would you like anything to drink, sir?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but subdued. Keanu looked up with that same soft, unreadable expression. "Water would be great. Thank you." His tone was kind, almost gentle, and that simple response made Rachel's chest ache with relief and guilt. She poured the glass quickly, setting it down on his tray. "I apologize again for earlier," she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I didn't mean to raise my voice. The turbulence caught us off guard." Keanu smiled faintly, shaking his head. "No need to apologize," he said. "You were doing your job." "I should have listened sooner." His words were simple, but they carried weight. They disarmed her completely. Rachel nodded once, unable to speak, and walked back to the galley before emotion betrayed her. Emily caught her eye when she returned. "So," she whispered. Rachel's lips parted in disbelief. "He thanked me," she said softly. "After everything, he thanked me." Emily let out a quiet laugh of astonishment. "Only Keanu Reeves," she said. Rachel leaned against the counter, finally allowing herself a shaky breath. The worst had passed, or so she thought. What she didn't know was that this small encounter would soon follow her far beyond this flight, and the truth about who owned this jet would turn her entire world upside down. Rachel's pulse wouldn't slow down. Even as she tried to focus on her duties, her mind replayed that awful moment over and over like a broken recording. The sharpness in her own tone, the stillness in his face, the click of the seatbelt, each detail looped endlessly in her thoughts. She couldn't believe she'd done it. Of all the people in the world to reprimand, she had scolded Keanu Reeves. Her stomach twisted. Keanu Reeves, the same man who was known for kindness, for humility, for treating everyone with respect. The man who was so admired that even other celebrities called him the good one. And she, Rachel Miller, had just spoken to him like a stubborn teenager, ignoring instructions. She could still hear Emily's whisper echoing in her ears. "That's Keanu Reeves! You just yelled at Keanu Reeves!" The thought made her dizzy. She had spent 18 years building a flawless professional record. Not one complaint, not one bad review. She had trained younger attendants, won awards, and earned the trust of her supervisors. But none of that mattered if a client of his status decided to file a report. In private aviation, one complaint from the wrong person could end everything. Reputation was currency, and hers could evaporate in a single phone call. She imagined the chain reaction: Keanu mentioning the incident to the company's owner, the owner calling her manager calling her into the office with that heavy sigh she'd heard only once before. Then came the quiet words, "We have to let you go." Her hands began to tremble as she set a tray down in the galley. Her throat tightened and her stomach churned. She didn't even want to look toward seat 2A, but part of her needed to know, was he angry, offended, embarrassed? Finally, unable to stand the suspense, she peeked through the narrow gap in the curtain. Keanu sat in his seat, perfectly relaxed, his seatbelt still fastened, his posture calm, and a faint smile rested on his face. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't whispering to anyone. He was simply sipping his water, gazing out the window as though nothing had happened. Rachel froze. She studied him for a long moment, trying to decipher the expression. Was that amusement or quiet disappointment? He looked peaceful, too peaceful, and that somehow made her even more anxious. She turned away quickly, pressing her back against the counter. Emily looked over from the opposite side of the galley, eyebrows raised. Is he mad? Rachel shook her head. No, she whispered. He's smiling. Emily's eyes widened. Smiling? That's a good thing, right? Rachel didn't answer. Her chest felt tight. A smile could mean anything. She'd learned long ago that the quiet ones were the hardest to read. The longer Rachel stood in the galley, the more her imagination spun out of control. Every possible version of the aftermath played out in her head. Maybe he was the kind of person who smiled to hide irritation. Maybe he'd already sent a message to the company through his assistant. Or worse, maybe he owned part of the charter firm, and she'd just unknowingly embarrassed someone far above her pay grade. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She kept trying to remind herself that she hadn't done anything wrong. She'd followed protocol exactly. The captain had turned on the seatbelt light. She'd issued multiple warnings. The passenger refused to comply. Any instructor would have said she'd handled it perfectly. But none of that comforted her now. Logic didn't matter when reputation was everything. She poured herself a small glass of water and took a sip, trying to calm her shaking hands. Maybe it'll blow over, Emily said softly beside her. He doesn't seem angry. Rachel forced a hollow laugh. You don't have to be angry to ruin someone's career. All it takes is one email. Unprofessional conduct, discourteous tone. That's all. They'll need to pull me from rotation. Emily frowned. But he's Keanu Reeves. He's supposed to be, like, the nicest guy alive. You've seen the stories, right? He wouldn't do that. Rachel wanted to believe that. She really did. But she'd also learned that people could surprise you when their pride was bruised. It wasn't always about kindness. Sometimes it was about image. If she'd embarrassed him, even accidentally, he might feel obligated to report it just to save face. She glanced at the cabin curtain again. The faint sound of pages turning reached her ears. He was still writing in that same notebook, calm and silent, as if turbulence, confrontation, and everything else meant nothing to him. There was a strange grace in that, the kind of composure she wished she could summon herself. A memory flashed in her mind her first week on the job years ago, when an instructor told her, the most dangerous passengers aren't the loud ones, they're the quiet ones. They make their moves later, and you never see it coming. That line echoed through her now, like prophecy. Rachel straightened her uniform, smoothed her sleeves, and forced herself to return to work. There were still passengers to check on, snacks to distribute, routines to maintain. If she could just get through the next few hours without another incident, maybe, just maybe, the story would end quietly. But as she walked past seat 2A again, she couldn't help glancing down. Keanu was looking out the window, sunlight brushing his face, a calm half-smile on his lips. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod, warm, unbothered, almost reassuring. Rachel blinked in surprise. He wasn't pretending. That expression was genuine. "Thank you for the water," he said softly. Her heart nearly stopped. "You're welcome, sir," she managed to whisper, before walking away quickly, her mind spinning with disbelief. Rachel walked back into the galley and leaned against the counter, pressing her hand to her chest. Her heart was still racing, but for the first time since the confrontation, there was something different beneath the fear. Confusion. He had just thanked her. Genuinely. Not sarcastically, not curtly, but in the same calm, grounded tone that had followed every story ever told about Keanu Reeves. Emily noticed the color return to her cheeks. "So?" she asked quickly. "Did he say something?" Rachel exhaled, her voice trembling. "He thanked me, like nothing happened." Emily's eyes widened. "He's seriously the most chill person on earth. You might actually be fine." Rachel wanted to agree. She wanted to believe that this flight would end quietly, that she could go home and laugh about it someday. But her instincts, honed from nearly 2 decades in the air, told her not to relax yet. Calm could be misleading. She'd seen people act kind to her face, only to send scathing feedback after landing. The quiet after conflict was never truly quiet. It just disguised the storm waiting below. As she straightened a stack of napkins, her mind flashed through headlines she'd read online about Keanu over the years. Actor donates millions to hospital. Keanu Reeves helps crew members in need. Keanu takes city bus after movie premiere. Every story had painted him as humble, patient, decent. It didn't add up with someone who would make trouble for a flight attendant doing her job. But fame complicated everything. Even the nicest people had expectations. Rachel peeked out again, unable to stop herself. He was still in the same position, seatbelt secured, shoulders relaxed, eyes focused somewhere far beyond the horizon. His water glass sat half empty on the tray beside the closed notebook. The sunlight framed him in a warm glow that made him look almost otherworldly, peaceful in a way that made her own panic feel small. She turned back to Emily. "He doesn't look angry," Rachel said quietly. "But he doesn't look amused either. It's like he's somewhere else." Emily shrugged. "Maybe he's just used to being treated like that. Famous people get all kinds of attention, some good, some bad. You were just doing your job." Rachel wanted to believe her, but deep down, the self-doubt gnawed at her. She prided herself on reading people, and this situation had rattled that confidence. For the first time in years, she couldn't tell if she had just made an honest mistake or if she had just humiliated the one passenger she should have treated with perfect grace. The captain's voice came through the intercom again, calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've cleared the turbulence and should have smooth skies for the remainder of the flight. Please feel free to relax." Relax. The word felt ironic. Rachel glanced once more toward 2A. Keanu lifted his glass slightly in her direction, a small, polite acknowledgement, then took another sip before returning his gaze to the clouds. Rachel's stomach twisted again. She forced a smile for the other passengers, but inside, the panic had only deepened. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't over. She knew that much. And by the time they landed, the truth about what she'd just done and who she'd done it to would hit her harder than the turbulence ever could. The rhythm of the engines faded into the background as Rachel stood by the galley window, staring at the faint horizon where the sky met endless white clouds. Her hands rested on the counter, her fingers tracing invisible lines across the polished metal. She couldn't stop thinking about the last 20 minutes, how a single moment of instinct might have rewritten her entire career. Her mentor's voice echoed in her memory, as clear as if she were standing right beside her again. "Safety first, no matter who's watching. Your job isn't to please passengers, it's to protect them, even from themselves." That lesson had defined her from the very beginning. She remembered her first flight as a trainee for a commercial airline. The aircraft had been packed, children crying, luggage crammed into every overhead bin, passengers impatient after a long delay. She'd been young and eager, determined to prove herself. Halfway through the flight, turbulence struck unexpectedly. The first, kind that threw cups off trays and rattled the ceiling panels. A man sitting in the exit row had ignored repeated instructions to fasten his belt. He'd been loud, dismissive, insisting that these rules are just for show. Rachel had approached him 3 times, just like today. The third time, her voice had been firm. She'd warned him the turbulence could turn violent at any second. Moments later, the aircraft had dropped suddenly, one of those terrifying freefalls that made the cabin erupt with gasps. The unbuckled passenger had lurched upward, hitting his shoulder against the sidewall. It could have been his head. It could have killed him. Rachel had rushed to check on him after the plane leveled out. He was pale, shaken, but alive. And the first words out of his mouth had been, "I should have listened to you." She never forgot that. That moment had solidified something deep inside her, a belief that doing the right thing didn't always feel right in the moment. Sometimes it made you the villain. Sometimes it made you the hero no one saw. And now, years later, that principle was being tested again. The difference was, this time it wasn't an anonymous passenger, it was someone the entire world admired. Someone who could undo 18 years of hard work with one quiet word. She looked toward seat 2A again. Keanu sat motionless, his profile calm against the faint glow of afternoon sunlight. He looked untouchable, composed, as though turbulence didn't apply to him at all. Rachel's heart tightened. What if safety isn't enough this time? She thought. What if integrity costs me everything? The old saying from training came back to her again. In the air, there's no room for hesitation. She had followed that creed her whole career, but this was the first time she wasn't sure she'd done the right thing. Rachel rubbed her temple, trying to steady the rush of thoughts. Every lesson, every flight, every safety drill she had ever practiced suddenly felt heavy with meaning. Her mind drifted back again to those long, exhausting years working commercial routes that blurred together like one endless stretch of sky. There had been the night flight to Boston, where an elderly woman had fainted midair because she hadn't eaten all day. Rachel had stayed kneeling beside her for nearly an hour, monitoring her breathing while the rest of the crew scrambled for supplies. She'd learned that night that compassion was a form of duty too, not just regulation. There had been the emergency landing in Denver, when smoke filled the back of the cabin after an electrical failure. Rachel had led passengers calmly down the slide while her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her own voice. Her supervisor later told her she'd acted like she'd done it 100 times before. She hadn't. She was just too scared to do anything but follow her training. And then there was the turbulence incident that had defined her career. She could still see it clearly, the fastened seatbelt sign glowing red, the impatient passenger shaking his head. She had forced herself to speak with authority then, too, even as doubt clawed at her. She had learned that enforcement wasn't about control, it was about care. Rules existed because the air was unpredictable. The memory made her throat tighten. That experience had shaped her into the kind of attendant who never looked the other way. She was proud of that, or at least she had been until now. Because for the first time, she wondered if she'd gone too far. Maybe there were times when gentleness mattered more than principle. Maybe tone mattered as much as truth. She had enforced the rule, but what if her firmness had embarrassed him in front of others? The thought made her skin prickle with dread. She leaned closer to the curtain, peeking toward 2A again. Keanu had taken off his reading glasses and was rubbing his temple lightly. The light from the window caught the faint silver streaks in his hair. He didn't look upset. He didn't even look bothered. He looked thoughtful. She couldn't tell if that made her feel better or worse. The hum of the cabin wrapped around her, oddly soothing in its steadiness. She could hear the faint rustle of a magazine, the creak of leather seats shifting, the occasional clink of a cup. Every normal sound reminded her how fragile her own composure was. She whispered the words her mentor had drilled into her. Safety first, no matter who's watching. But this time, the words didn't feel empowering. They felt like a test she hadn't realized she was taking. Was it still the right thing to do if it cost you your peace? Rachel's thoughts grew quieter as the jet leveled out. The storm inside her had slowed, but it hadn't disappeared. She stared down at her reflection in the polished counter, tired eyes. Calm, mask. 18 years of discipline had taught her to appear composed, even when her heart was breaking. Her mentor's words returned once more, softer this time, almost like a whisper. "It's not about who you correct, Rachel. It's about why you do it." She breathed deeply, letting that truth sink in. She hadn't raised her voice to prove power. She had done it because the rule mattered, because she cared about every life inside this aircraft, including his. Still, the fear lingered. Integrity always came with risk. She wondered if doing the right thing had ever truly been safe. When she looked up again, Keanu was adjusting his seat slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he gave her a small nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her chest ache with relief. Maybe he understood. Maybe he saw the intent behind the moment, not the mistake. Rachel exhaled slowly, whispering to herself, "Safety first, no matter who's watching." But for the first time, the words felt like both a burden and a prayer. The cabin lights dimmed to a softer hue as the jet steadied into smoother air. The tension that had gripped everyone seemed to ease little by little, like a collective exhale. Rachel moved mechanically, checking seatbelts and gathering stray cups, but her mind wasn't really there. Her hands trembled every time she passed seat 2A, and though she tried to avoid eye contact, she felt his presence like quiet gravity pulling at her every step. She was arranging a tray of drinks when she heard a gentle voice behind her. "Excuse me," the man said softly. Rachel froze before turning. It was him. Keanu sat upright, his expression calm, that familiar stillness about him that somehow filled the space without ever demanding it. His voice carried warmth, but none of the entitlement she'd grown used to from wealthy passengers. "Could I have some coffee, please?" he asked, smiling faintly. "Black, if you have it." For a split second, Rachel couldn't move. It was such a simple request, but her nerves tangled into panic. She nodded quickly, fumbling slightly with the silver pot as she poured. The liquid sloshed dangerously close to the rim before she steadied her hand. "Of course, sir," she managed, her voice tight but polite. "Right away." She placed the cup on his tray, her fingers brushing the porcelain. I'm sorry again. About earlier," she said before she could stop herself. "I shouldn't have." But Keanu raised a hand gently, not to silence her, but to ease her. His smile deepened, and his eyes softened. "Please," he said quietly. "You don't need to apologize." Rachel blinked. He shook his head, that small, patient gesture that somehow carried more weight than words. "You were right," he said. "I wasn't following instructions. I was distracted. And you did exactly what you were supposed to do. You were protecting everyone, including me." The sincerity in his tone caught her off guard. There was no sarcasm, no polite performance, no hint of ego, just calm truth. Rachel stood there for a moment, unsure how to respond. No passenger had ever spoken to her like that, especially not one with his kind of influence. Most would have brushed off the interaction or reacted defensively. But Keanu was looking at her with a kind of understanding that made her throat tighten. "Thank you for doing your job," he said simply. It was such a modest sentence, but it hit her like a lifeline. Her composure cracked, just a little, her voice trembling as she replied, "You're very kind, sir." "I appreciate that," he chuckled softly, leaning back in his seat, the coffee steaming gently between them. "Kindness isn't special," he said after a pause. "It's just what should be normal." Rachel stood frozen for a moment longer, unsure whether to step away or stay. His words had settled into her chest with unexpected warmth, quieting the chaos that had been consuming her since the confrontation. He spoke so simply, yet there was something grounding about the way he said things, as if he wasn't trying to make anyone feel better, only to tell the truth. "Kindness isn't special," he had said. The sentence replayed in her head as she tried to steady herself. How could someone who'd been publicly adored for decades still speak like that? "Would you like some sugar or cream, sir?" she asked, mostly to give herself something to say. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "No, thank you. Just like this." He took a small sip, then looked up at her.
"You've been flying long?"
The question surprised her. Most passengers didn't bother with conversation unless they wanted something. "About 18 years," she replied cautiously. He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "That's a long time. You must have seen just about everything up here." Rachel let out a quiet laugh before she could stop herself. "More than I can count. Everything from engagements to meltdowns, and plenty of turbulence in between." Keanu smiled again. "And yet you still care enough to enforce the rules. That says a lot." His tone wasn't patronizing. He meant it. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She had spent so many years being treated like background scenery that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as a person doing meaningful work. She found herself relaxing, even smiling a little. "Honestly, it's just habit at this point," she admitted. "You see what can happen when people ignore small things. Seatbelts, exits, oxygen masks, they all seem trivial until the day they aren't." "That sounds like experience talking," he said. "It is," she replied quietly. "I once had a passenger nearly crack his skull during turbulence because he refused to buckle up. Ever since then, I don't take chances." He listened without interrupting, his expression serious, not in a performative way, but in a deeply attentive one. When she finished, he nodded. "Then you did the right thing today." Her eyes lifted to his face. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said. "Doing what's right doesn't always look polite in the moment, but people like you are the reason the rest of us make it home safely." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The words reached something deeper in her than she expected. "Thank you," she whispered finally. "That means more than you know." Keanu gave her another one of those soft, understanding smiles. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said quietly. She believed the same thing, doing the right thing, even when no one noticed. Rachel hesitated, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Someone you used to know?" she asked softly. Keanu's gaze drifted toward the window, the light catching the faint lines of reflection on the glass. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "My mother. She used to tell me, don't confuse kindness with weakness. Sometimes it takes more strength to be gentle than it does to fight." His words lingered in the air like a soft echo. Rachel felt something shift inside her, the last of her fear melting away. The same man she'd thought might end her career was now sitting there, sipping coffee, sharing something deeply human. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," she said. "She was," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "And I think she would have liked you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engines and the clink of the cup as Keanu set it back on the tray. Rachel felt the tightness in her chest ease completely. She realized then that this wasn't a disaster, it was a reminder. Sometimes the world tested you not to break you, but to reveal what kind of person you truly were. The plane steadied as it crossed above the last stretch of the Rockies, leaving the turbulence behind like a bad dream. The cabin lights glowed with an amber calm. Passengers returned to their books and screens. The world felt quiet again. Rachel made one more round, collecting empty glasses and checking the seatbelts that had once been the cause of her panic. When she reached seat 2A, she hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt. Keanu looked peaceful, his notebook closed now, hands resting loosely in his lap. He noticed her approach and smiled. "Everything's smooth again," he said gently. "You can relax now." She gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "Old habits. I don't really relax until we land." He tilted his head slightly. "How long have you been doing this?" 18 years, she said, surprised he'd remembered. "Though it feels like more. Airtime changes the way you measure years." "That's a long time to spend taking care of people," he said. "You must have some stories." Rachel smiled, though it carried fatigue more than humor. "A few hundred, at least. Some good, some I'd rather forget." He leaned forward a little, genuinely interested. "What's the hardest part?" She didn't answer right away. It wasn't a question she was used to. Most passengers wanted trivia, celebrity gossip, strange incidents, exotic routes. No one ever asked about the hard parts. The hardest part, she said slowly, is being invisible. People don't look at you. They look through you. You're just hands pouring coffee or a voice giving instructions. Sometimes you feel like part of the furniture, useful, but unseen. Keanu's eyes softened. He didn't interrupt. He let the silence stretch just long enough for her words to breathe. Rachel glanced at the window, embarrassed by how much she'd just revealed. Sorry, I didn't mean to sound bitter. It's just, after a while, the uniform becomes armor. You start to hide behind it. I understand, he said quietly. His tone wasn't one of sympathy, but recognition, like someone who'd carried the same weight in a different form. She looked back at him, unsure what he meant. You understand? He nodded. People assume they know you. They see the surface movies, headlines, whatever image they've decided on, and they stop seeing the person behind it. Sometimes it's lonelier than people think. Rachel was struck by the quiet honesty in his voice. For a man whose face was known around the world, he sounded as human and vulnerable as anyone she'd ever met. You're not invisible, he added softly. You make people feel safe. That's not small. That's sacred. Rachel's breath caught for a moment. No one had ever described her work that way before. Sacred. The word hung in the air like something fragile and precious, and she didn't know what to do with it. She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. Sacred's not a word people usually use for flight attendants.
Maybe they should, Keanu said. You take care of strangers thousands of feet above the earth, trusting that your calm can hold theirs together.
That's not service. That's stewardship. She looked down, trying to steady the sudden emotion that rose inside her. Years of long flights, rude passengers, endless layovers. All those invisible hours felt suddenly seen. I never thought of it that way, she said softly. He sipped his coffee again, the warmth curling in the air between them. I had a friend once who worked hospital shifts, he continued. She said something I never forgot. People remember how you made them feel when they were scared. I think that's true for you, too. Rachel's lips parted slightly, caught between gratitude and disbelief. Most of the time, people are too stressed to notice, she admitted. They're late for meetings or afraid of flying. We're late. Just background noise. Keanu shook his head slowly. Not to the ones who need you. There was something about the way he said it that made her think he was talking about more than airplanes. She didn't ask, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, a kind of quiet grief he carried gracefully, like an old scar that never quite faded. Rachel's curiosity edged forward, gentle and respectful. You travel a lot, don't you? He nodded. More than I'd like to. It's part of the work, but sometimes I miss stillness. You seem calm, she said. Like turbulence doesn't bother you at all. He smiled faintly. Turbulence used to scare me. Now I see it differently. Planes shake, skies change, but the destination doesn't disappear just because it's rough getting there. Rachel blinked. That's surprisingly comforting. He chuckled. Occupational hazard. I've had to remind myself of that a lot. For the first time since the incident, she laughed quietly, genuine this time. Maybe I should write that down. Could help me next time someone refuses to buckle up. You can quote me, he said, eyes glinting with humor. Their small exchange dissolved the last of the tension between them. The space that had once felt heavy now felt light, human, alive. Rachel looked at him thoughtfully. You're not what I expected, she said before realizing she'd spoken aloud. He tilted his head. Is that good or bad? Good, she said quickly, smiling. Very good. For a while, neither of them spoke. The world outside was a wash of golden clouds, the horizon glowing like liquid fire. Rachel found herself breathing more easily, as though the cabin had filled with something softer than air. Understanding, maybe. Keanu set his cup down and looked out the window. You know, he said quietly, people like you are the reason some of us still believe in goodness. You don't do it for recognition. You just show up every day. Rachel smiled, the words sinking deep. It's easy to forget it matters, she admitted. Sometimes I think no one notices at all."
"Oh, they notice," he said, his voice low and certain. "Maybe not with words, but they feel it. The calm you bring, the way you treat them when they're afraid, that stays with people long after they land." The engines hummed softly beneath them. For the first time that day, Rachel felt the strange peace that came when fear met grace. She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for listening." He met her gaze with that quiet, unshakable kindness. "Thank you," he said, "for reminding me what dignity looks like in motion." Outside, the clouds drifted by, serene and endless. The hum of the engines filled the cabin again, a steady rhythm that matched the calm that had settled inside Rachel. She had just finished a quiet conversation with Keanu that left her oddly lighter, as if the weight of the earlier confrontation had melted away somewhere above the clouds. When she stepped back into the galley, Emily was already waiting, eyes wide with barely contained excitement. "Oh my gosh," Emily whispered, her voice half a squeal, half a whisper. "You will not believe this. He just thanked me for bringing him pretzels." Rachel blinked. "Pretzels?" "Yeah." "He asked if we had any, and I said I'd check. So I gave him one of the extra bags we keep for long flights. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, 'Thank you so much. That was really kind of you.' Like, he meant it." Emily pressed a hand to her chest. "Who does that?" "He's actually grateful for airplane snacks." Rachel couldn't help but smile. "Maybe he's just polite." Emily shook her head emphatically. "No, it's more than that. He said it like it mattered. I've served plenty of rich people, and trust me, they don't even see us most of the time. But him, he noticed." Before Rachel could respond, the intercom crackled softly. The captain's voice came through, calm and professional. "Just wanted to let you ladies know, passenger in 2A made a donation through our company's Veterans Partnership Program, a full year's worth of fuel credits." "Wait, what? He did that now? On the flight?" Rachel frowned in confusion. How would he even know about that? "Apparently, he asked one of the ground team members before takeoff if we still worked with the Veterans Charity," the captain replied. "Said he wanted to contribute quietly. Didn't make a big deal of it. Just handed over the authorization form before we left the gate." The radio went silent again, leaving the two women staring at each other in stunned disbelief. Emily was the first to speak. "Who does that? Like, who literally donates fuel for a whole year while sitting in business class eating pretzels?" Rachel exhaled slowly, her pulse steadying in awe. "Someone who means it when he says kindness isn't special." For a long moment, they both stood there, the cabin lights glinting off the metal counters, the soft vibration of the engines surrounding them like a heartbeat. Rachel felt something shift inside her again. The man she'd thought she'd angered, the one she'd imagined would end her career, was out there quietly doing good without fanfare, without witnesses. And suddenly, she understood why the world spoke about him the way it did. Emily leaned against the counter, still shaking her head in disbelief. "You know, I always thought that stuff online about him giving away money and helping strangers was just fan exaggeration. But he's really like that, isn't he?" Rachel smiled faintly, watching through the narrow slit of the galley curtain as Keanu flipped open his notebook again. "I think he's exactly like that," she said quietly. "There's no performance. He doesn't need an audience." Emily peeked too, her voice soft with wonder. "He even helped one of the passengers earlier. Did you see that?" The older gentleman in 4C dropped his pen, and before I could get there, Keanu had already picked it up for him. He smiled like it was nothing. "I swear, everyone else on this plane would have made the man bend over and struggle just to prove a point." Rachel let out a small laugh. 18 years in the air, and I've never seen anything like it." The younger attendant turned to her, curiosity glowing in her eyes. "Do you think he'll say anything when we land? Like a note to the company or a mention to management?" "I don't think he will," Rachel replied. "He doesn't strike me as someone who needs to report kindness. He just lives it." There was a quiet admiration in her voice she hadn't felt for a long time, not for a passenger, not even for the job. Something about this flight had shaken her, not in fear this time, but in perspective. Emily crossed her arms, still processing it all. "You know, when he first walked in, I thought he looked normal. like someone's quiet uncle. But the longer he's here, the more it feels like the whole plane revolves around him without him ever asking for it. Rachel nodded. It's presence, not power. There's a difference. The younger woman smiled softly. You sound like you've figured something out. Maybe I have, Rachel said. I think I just forgot that not everyone uses power to make others feel small. They fell silent again. From the cabin came the low murmur of passengers chatting, the sound of ice clinking in glasses, the easy rhythm of air travel resuming its calm routine. And somewhere within that ordinary lull, Rachel felt an extraordinary sense of peace. Her fear of being reported, of being reprimanded, of losing her job, it all seemed foolish now. She'd been so afraid of the consequences of doing what was right that she hadn't stopped to notice that someone like Keanu Reeves had seen her intent for what it truly was. Integrity, she realized. Recognized integrity. Rachel stood quietly by the galley door, watching Keanu for a long moment. He was speaking softly with another passenger now, a young man who looked nervous about flying. Keanu was pointing out something through the window, probably the sunset, and the passenger was smiling. The fear on his face was gone. Emily whispered, "He just made that guy's day. I think he makes everyone's day." Rachel nodded slowly. "And he doesn't even try. That's what makes it real." A soft chime sounded from the intercom as the captain announced they were beginning their descent. Passengers began preparing for landing, fastening belts, stowing bags. The familiar rhythm of flight returned, but it felt different now. Rachel glanced once more towards seat 2A. Keanu caught her eye and gave a small, genuine nod. She returned it with a quiet smile. She realized then that some people didn't need applause or headlines to change a room. They did it simply by being decent when no one was watching. And as she checked the cabin one last time, Rachel whispered to herself, kindness isn't special, it's sacred. For the first time in years, she believed it. The sun was beginning to sink over the Pacific as the aircraft started its gentle descent toward Los Angeles. Golden light spilled through the cabin windows, bathing everything in a warm glow that made the leather seats shine softly. The passengers stirred, stretching, fastening seatbelts, murmuring to one another about meetings, hotels, and connections. But to Rachel, the descent felt different this time. The hum of the engines, the soft chime of the seatbelt sign, even the captain's smooth announcement, all of it carried a strange calm she hadn't felt in years. She moved through the aisle with quiet precision, double-checking every latch, every buckle, every tray table. Her body worked on autopilot, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying everything that had happened since takeoff. The confrontation, the fear, the unexpected kindness that had followed. It all felt like a dream, one that had changed her in ways she didn't fully understand yet. When she reached seat 2A, Keanu was already sitting upright, his seatbelt fastened neatly, his notebook tucked away in his carry bag. He looked up as she approached, that familiar calm still written across his face. "Almost home," she said softly. He smiled. "Almost." Rachel hesitated, the words caught in her throat. There was so much she wanted to say: gratitude, apology, admiration, but none of it felt right in that moment. Everything she could have said would have sounded small compared to what she had felt on this flight. Keanu seemed to sense that. He gestured lightly toward the window. "Beautiful light, isn't it?" She followed his gaze. The ocean stretched below them, rippling gold under the sun. "It is," she said quietly. "Days like this make you forget how exhausting flying can be." He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I think that's true about most things. The hard parts fade when you notice the beauty." Rachel smiled faintly. "You must see a lot of beauty in your line of come." "Sometimes," he said. "But it's the quiet moments like this that remind me what really matters." The plane began to angle downward more steeply. The pressure shifted, and a few passengers adjusted in their seats. Rachel steadied herself on the aisle edge and said the line she had said 1,000 times before, but this time with genuine warmth. "We'll be landing shortly, Mr. Reeves. Thank you for flying with us." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Thank you for looking out for us." She felt her throat tighten again, but she managed a small nod. "It's my job." He smiled gently. "It's more than that." The landing gear lowered with a faint rumble, and the cabin filled with that familiar mix of anticipation and silence. Los Angeles shimmered beneath them, a city of glass and motion wrapped in the gold of sunset. Rachel made her final pass through the aisle, ensuring every seatbelt was secured, every bag stowed, every tray locked. It was routine, but tonight it felt ceremonial, almost reverent. She reached the galley just as Emily whispered, "I think he's thanking everyone." Rachel looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Emily nodded toward the front. "He's literally going row by row, saying thank you to each person he passes. I've never seen anything like it." Rachel leaned slightly, watching through the narrow aisle. Sure enough, Keanu was standing now, calm and unhurried despite the usual rush of passengers preparing to disembark. He spoke quietly to each one, shaking hands, offering small smiles. No entourage, no security detail pushing him forward, just a man showing gratitude. When he reached the cockpit, he paused to thank the pilot and first officer. Rachel caught part of it through the open door. "You handled that turbulence perfectly. That's real skill. Thank you for keeping us safe." The captain chuckled over the intercom moments later, announcing, "We appreciate the kind words from our passenger in 2A. His tone carried respect and a hint of disbelief. Emily turned back to Rachel, whispering, "He just complimented the captain. Who does that?" Rachel didn't answer. She felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt since her early days in aviation. A quiet pride, the kind that reminded her why she'd chosen this path in the first place. As the wheels touched down and the brakes engaged, a soft ripple of applause filled the cabin. Rachel smiled despite herself. It wasn't for her, or even for the landing. It was for the sense of peace that had carried everyone through the flight. When they finally rolled to a stop on the tarmac and the seatbelt sign turned off, Rachel opened the cabin door, the smell of warm California air rushing in. Passengers began to gather their things. Keanu waited until nearly everyone had exited before stepping forward, his bag slung over one shoulder, his movements unhurried. He paused in front of Emily first. "Thank you for the snacks," he said, smiling warmly. "You made the flight better than it needed to be." Emily's face lit up, speechless for once. Then he turned to Rachel. Keanu stood in front of Rachel, the fading sunlight spilling in through the open cabin door behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the ground crew faded into a distant hum, leaving only the quiet between them. He adjusted the strap of his bag and met her gaze directly. His eyes were calm, the same quiet strength she'd seen all flight long. "You know," he said softly, "people spend their lives trying to impress the world, but very few remember to protect it." Rachel blinked, unsure how to respond. He continued, "Don't ever apologize for protecting people. You'd be surprised how rare that is." The words hit her like an anchor, steadying, grounding. They were so simple, yet they carried more weight than any formal compliment she'd ever received. She swallowed the lump in her throat, whispering, "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. I really needed to hear that." Keanu smiled, just that quiet, unguarded smile that felt more like truth than kindness. "Take care of yourself, Rachel," he said, his tone warm, almost fatherly. And then he turned, stepping down the narrow stairs into the golden glare of the hangar. Rachel stood frozen, watching until his figure disappeared into the sunlight. For a long moment, she didn't move. The world felt suspended, still. Then she took a breath, her shoulders straightening. The fear, the doubt, the exhaustion, they all lifted, replaced by something stronger. Respect, gratitude, peace. She whispered to herself, "Safety first, no matter who's watching." This time, it didn't sound like a rule. It sounded like faith. Rachel had barely pulled into her driveway when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. The caller ID displayed the name she least wanted to see. Mr. Hargrove, Director of Operations. Her stomach twisted. She hesitated before answering, her voice tentative. "This is Rachel.
Rachel. Hargrove's voice came through, calm but clipped, the kind of tone that never carried good news. I need to see you immediately. Come to the office at the private terminal. Her grip tightened on the phone. Is everything all right, sir? I think it's best we talk in person, he said. Then came the soft click of disconnection. Rachel sat in her car for a moment, her pulse pounding in her ears. She knew this tone, formal, measured, distant. It was the tone managers used before disciplinary meetings. The warmth of the evening sunlight outside didn't touch the cold knot forming in her chest. On the drive back to the airport, every mile felt longer than the last. Her mind replayed the confrontation in the cabin like a film on loop. The sharpness in her voice, the look of surprise on his face, the trembling in her hands afterward. She had tried to convince herself that everything was fine, that Keanu Reeves had meant what he said when he told her not to apologize. But what if he'd changed his mind after landing? What if that gentle smile had been a mask of politeness before a formal complaint? By the time she reached the terminal, her palms were damp against the steering wheel. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few ground vehicles preparing for morning flights. She sat for a moment, gathering courage before stepping out. The cool night air hit her face, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and sea salt. Inside, the terminal was quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above polished marble floors. At the far end of the corridor, through the glass doors of the operations office, she could see Mr. Hargrove standing by his desk, his suit jacket hanging perfectly straight, his posture rigid as ever. She knocked lightly. You wanted to see me, sir? He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Come in, Rachel. Close the door, please. Her heart sank. She obeyed, the soft click of the door sounding far louder than it should have. Hargrove gestured toward the chair, across from his desk. She sat down carefully, folding her hands to hide the tremor in her fingers. He studied her for a moment, his gray eyes steady, betraying nothing.
We received a very unusual call about your flight today, he said finally. Rachel's breath caught. The room felt suddenly too small. Rachel's throat felt dry, but she managed to speak.
I see. Was there a problem, sir? Hargrove didn't answer right away. He reached for a small notepad on his desk and flipped through a few pages. The sound of the paper made her stomach tighten further. Finally, he looked up. You had a high-profile passenger on that flight, correct? Yes, sir, she replied quietly. Mr. Reeves. He nodded slowly. And there was a situation during the flight? Rachel swallowed hard. Yes, sir. There was turbulence. The seatbelt light was on. Mr. Reeves hadn't fastened his belt, and I reminded him several times. When he didn't respond, She hesitated, raised my voice. I know it wasn't ideal, but safety protocol. Hargrove lifted a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. I'm aware of what happened. Rachel's heart sank even further. Then he filed a complaint? She whispered. His expression didn't change. Rachel, he said slowly, what I'm about to tell you is not a complaint. It's a commendation. For a moment, she didn't process the words. I'm sorry. What? Hargrove leaned back in his chair, a rare flicker of amusement crossing his face. Mr. Reeves called this evening, personally. He said you handled yourself with professionalism and courage. He said your insistence on safety made him feel, Hargrove glanced at his notes, grateful to be in the care of someone who takes their responsibility seriously. Rachel blinked, stunned. He called? Yes, Hargrove said, his tone softening. And not only that, he left instructions with our client relations department. He's establishing a fund for flight crew training. He said he wanted it named after someone who understands that doing the right thing isn't always easy. The words washed over her like sunlight breaking through clouds. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Hargrove continued, his voice gentler now. He asked that you be informed first. He also requested that you stay assigned to his future flights, if you're willing. Rachel stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up. I don't understand. I was sure I'd be reprimanded. Hargrove's lips curved into a faint smile.
Rachel, if every flight attendant had your integrity, I'd sleep better at night. You enforced safety protocols under pressure and treated a high-profile client exactly the same as any other passenger. That's exactly what this company stands for. Her eyes stung. She blinked quickly, but the tears still threatened to fall.
Thank you, sir.
I was only doing my job. And that, Hargrove said firmly, is precisely why this call mattered. Rachel sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The wave of relief hit her so suddenly she could hardly breathe. She'd spent the entire drive preparing to defend herself, and now the words commendation and fund echoed in her head like a song she didn't yet believe was real. Mr. Hargrove leaned forward slightly. He told me something else, he said. He said Rachel Miller reminded me that leadership isn't about authority, it's about care. I think that's the highest praise I've ever heard from a client. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. I don't know what to say. Then don't, Hargrove replied with a small smile. Just keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Rachel nodded slowly, her chest full, her fear replaced with quiet astonishment. As she rose to leave, she looked back at the man who had once been her most intimidating superior. Thank you for believing me, she said softly. Thank yourself, he answered. You earned this. Outside, the runway lights shimmered against the night. Rachel walked toward her car feeling lighter than she had in years, her heart steady with a single truth: doing what's right always finds its way home. Rachel had started to rise from her seat when Hargrove spoke again. There's one more thing you should know, he said, his tone shifting from professional calm to something that carried just a hint of amusement. She paused halfway to standing. There's more? He nodded slowly, folding his hands on the desk. Yes, and I think you'll find it interesting. Rachel hesitated, her heartbeat quickening again. After everything she'd just heard, the commendation, the fund, the praise, she wasn't sure she could handle another surprise. What is it, sir? Hargrove took a breath, as if deciding how to phrase it. Mr. Reeves mentioned that he wanted to thank you in person next time he flies. But during the call, he also clarified something about the aircraft you worked on today. Rachel frowned. The Westward Trust charter? He smiled slightly. That's the one. You see, Westward Trust isn't a client of ours, it's an ownership shell. The aircraft is, well, in quote, privately owned, registered under that trust for discretion. She blinked, trying to process what he was saying. So, it's not leased to a company? No, Hargrove said. It's owned outright. He leaned back, eyes glinting with a trace of amusement. By Mr. Reeves himself. For a moment, Rachel didn't move. Her mind froze, replaying his words over and over until they clicked into place. Owned by what? She whispered. Keanu Reeves, Hargrove said clearly, his tone firm now. That was his jet. The one you worked today. Rachel stared at him in stunned silence. The air left her lungs all at once. Images from the flight flashed through her mind like lightning, the way she had stood over him, voice raised, warning that she would have the captain land if he didn't comply. The way she had pointed toward his seatbelt, demanding that he follow safety rules. The way she had spoken to him as though he were any other careless passenger. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. You mean, I threatened to have Keanu Reeves removed from his own jet? Hargrove chuckled softly, though his tone remained kind. That's exactly what I mean. And from what I can tell, he found it refreshing. Rachel covered her mouth, a mixture of horror and disbelief rushing through her. I can't believe this, she muttered. 18 years in the sky, and that's how I make history, by threatening to kick a Hollywood icon off his own plane. Hargrove gave a reassuring nod. If it makes you feel any better, he didn't sound offended. Quite the opposite. He said you reminded him that accountability doesn't vanish with status. His exact words were, she treated me like a person, not a pedestal. Rachel felt her cheeks flush, the absurdity of it all hitting her at once. I didn't even know who he was until Emily told me. Hargrove smiled knowingly. He mentioned that too. Said it was probably why he respected you even more. You didn't recognize him. and yet you still held him accountable. He told me that kind of courage is rare." Rachel let out a shaky laugh, her hand still pressed against her chest. "Courage," she repeated, almost to herself. "I thought I was having a panic attack." "Well," Hargrove said lightly, "sometimes courage looks a lot like panic, until you see it from a distance." Rachel sank back into her chair, feeling the surreal mix of relief and disbelief wash over her. "So all that time, I was scolding the owner of the jet about seatbelts. I might as well have told a king to get off his own throne." "Maybe," Hargrove replied, his tone calm but genuine. "But that's what makes it such a remarkable story. Most people would have lost their nerve, but you didn't. You saw a passenger ignoring a safety rule, and you enforced it. Simple as that." She shook her head slowly, still stunned. "It doesn't feel simple now. I keep picturing his face, when I said we could land and remove him if necessary." "He probably admired that," Hargrove said, glancing down at the notepad again. "He told me he's seen too many people compromise what's right just to please someone powerful. He said it was good to be reminded that integrity still exists at 30,000 feet. Rachel fell silent. The absurdity of the situation mixed with an unexpected warmth in her chest. "He really said that?" "He did," Hargrove confirmed. "And he wasn't exaggerating. He told me your professionalism inspired him." "That's not something I hear every day, especially from someone like him." Rachel exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. "I thought I'd ruined everything." "I almost didn't answer your call." Hargrove's expression softened. "If you hadn't, I'd have called again. I wasn't about to let you sit at home thinking your career was over, when it's probably the most secure it's been in years." She managed a laugh through the lump in her throat. "You have no idea how close I was to packing my uniform in a box." "Well, don't," he said firmly. "You're going to need it. I suspect Mr. Reeves will be requesting you specifically from now on." Her eyes widened. "He actually said that?" "He did. Said you bring a sense of calm to the cabin, even when enforcing the rules." Rachel's heart swelled with emotion. For so long, her job had felt mechanical, routine. But now, hearing those words, she felt something shift, a sense of purpose rekindling. Hargrove leaned forward slightly. "He also said something else, Rachel. Something I think you'll want to hear." Her pulse quickened again. "What was it?" Hargrove's tone softened. He said, "Rachel reminded me why humility matters. People think fame separates them from accountability, but it shouldn't. She treated me like a man, not a myth. I'll never forget that." Rachel felt her breath catch. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. The words seemed to echo through the room, wrapping around her like something sacred. "He said that?" she whispered. Hargrove nodded. "Exactly like that. And he meant every word." She pressed a trembling hand to her lips, overcome by the realization of what the day had truly meant. She hadn't just enforced a rule, she'd reminded someone the world admired, of the simple dignity of being human. A slow, stunned laugh escaped her. "I can't believe this. I really told Keanu Reeves to buckle up on his own plane." Hargrove smiled. "And he thanked you for it. You should be proud, Rachel." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "For the first time in a long while," she said softly, "I am." As she walked out of the office, the night air felt different, lighter, freer. She looked up at the sky, whispering to herself, "Safety first, no matter who's watching." This time, it made her smile. Rachel stood frozen in the middle of the hallway after leaving Hargrove's office. The hum of the building around her faded into nothing. All she could hear was the echo of his last words. "We should be proud to have employees like you." Her knees felt weak, and she leaned against the wall for support, half laughing, half breathless. It felt like her entire world had been flipped upside down in the span of a single day. That morning, she had walked onto a flight exhausted, burnt out, and questioning whether her years in the sky still meant anything. Now, she'd somehow ended up praised by one of the most respected people alive for doing the very thing she'd thought would cost her career. She stared down at her trembling hands,
remembering how tightly they'd gripped the coffee pot when she poured Keanu's drink. She'd been terrified he would look at her with disdain, that quiet condescension she'd seen from too many wealthy clients. But instead, he'd looked at her, like an equal no, like someone he respected. A wave of emotion rose in her chest. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. She also wanted to cry. The air in her lungs felt strange, lighter, freer, but filled with disbelief. She took a deep breath and began walking down the corridor, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Every step echoed the same thought. He thanked me. He really thanked me. In 18 years of service, she'd been complimented by captains, even recognized by a few executives. But this was different. It wasn't about protocol or courtesy, it was personal. Keanu Reeves, a man known for humility and grace, had gone out of his way to make sure her name was remembered. When she reached the glass doors leading to the terminal's main lobby, she stopped and looked out toward the dark runway. Planes blinked faintly against the distant horizon. For the first time in years, she didn't see steel and deadlines. She saw purpose. She thought back to her early training days, standing in cramped simulators, learning how to handle emergencies. She'd memorized checklists, memorized smiles. But no one had ever trained her for something like this, for the moment when doing her job with integrity would suddenly remind her of who she really was. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from Emily. "Did you hear? He called. I'm shaking. You're a legend now." Rachel laughed softly, the sound coming out like a release. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she replied. "I didn't do anything special. I just did my job." She hesitated, then added one more line. "But maybe that's what makes it special." As Rachel walked out into the cool night air, she felt the breeze sweep over her face, lifting a few strands of her hair. The lights of the runway shimmered in the distance like distant stars, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel weighed down by fatigue or doubt. Instead, a quiet, calm filled her chest, something steady and alive. She made her way across the lot to her car, the events of the day replaying in flashes, her voice cutting through the cabin, his steady eyes meeting hers, the calm apology, his quiet gratitude, and the moment in Hargrove's office when everything she feared turned into something beautiful. It was surreal. Every time she thought she had processed it, another layer of disbelief washed over her. When she got inside her car, she didn't start the engine right away. The silence felt grounding. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror, same face, same eyes, but she saw something there she hadn't seen in years. Strength. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail notification. She frowned. The caller ID said, "Private number." With hesitation, she pressed play. A soft male voice came through, calm, gentle. "Hi, Rachel, it's Keanu. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I just wanted to say thank you again. You reminded me that kindness and discipline can exist together. You didn't know who I was, and that's what made it honest. I respect that deeply. I hope you keep that fire. The world needs more of it. Take care." The message ended with a brief pause, followed by a quiet click. Rachel froze. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe. She replayed the message once, then again. The tone in his voice wasn't formal or rehearsed. It was real, heartfelt, the kind that couldn't be scripted. Tears welled in her eyes, and she covered her mouth, letting out a shaky laugh. She whispered to herself, "He actually called me." She leaned back against the seat, letting the weight of the day settle fully for the first time. The exhaustion was still there, but now it felt meaningful, earned. It wasn't the kind of tired that came from routine. It was the kind that came after doing something that mattered. After a few minutes, she looked up at the night sky. A plane crossed overhead, blinking red and white against the dark. For once, she wasn't thinking about safety reports or checklists. She was thinking about the passengers she'd helped over the years, the small ways she'd kept people safe without them even realizing it. And now, somehow, one of those passengers had changed the way she saw herself forever. Rachel sat there for a long time,
the glow from her dashboard lighting her face. She could have deleted the voicemail, but instead she saved it, marking it as protected. It wasn't just a message from a celebrity. It was a reminder that integrity still mattered, that doing the right thing without knowing who's watching could change more than just a job. It could change a life. She wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled faintly. In that quiet moment, she didn't feel like just a flight attendant. She felt like someone who had made a difference. When she finally started the car, she whispered the same words that had guided her career, words that now carried new meaning. "Safety first," she said softly, "no matter who's watching." As she drove home beneath the soft glow of the runway lights, Rachel felt peace, a rare, lasting peace that came from knowing she had stood her ground with grace. Tomorrow would bring new flights, new passengers, new challenges. But tonight, she carried a truth that would stay with her forever. Sometimes, doing your duty isn't just a rule. It's a reflection of who you are. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Rachel found the envelope wedged between a few utility bills and a grocery flyer in her mailbox. She almost missed it at first. There was no return address, no printed label, only her name, handwritten in neat, deliberate script. The handwriting was elegant, steady, and unfamiliar. She carried the small envelope into her kitchen, set it down beside her coffee mug, and stared at it for a long time. Something about it felt significant, though she couldn't say why. When she finally slid a knife along the edge and opened it, the scent of clean paper and faint ink filled the air. Inside was a single folded letter and a cream-colored card tucked beneath it. She unfolded the letter first. The handwriting was the same, measured, graceful, the kind that belonged to someone who took their time with words. "Dear Rachel," it began. She stopped breathing. She read the first line again just to be sure. "Dear Rachel." Her pulse quickened. She read on. "I wanted to thank you again for reminding me that integrity still exists in places most people overlook. The world feels faster every year, and in that rush, we lose the quiet values that keep us grounded: patience, kindness, and accountability. You reminded me what that looks like in action." Her hand trembled as she turned the page. The words flowed effortlessly, calm and thoughtful, just like the man she'd met on that flight. "I've spent years flying in and out of cities, across oceans, often surrounded by people who treat rules as suggestions. But that day, you reminded me why rules matter, not because they restrict us, but because they protect us. You didn't waver, even when it could have cost you. That kind of strength is rare." Rachel felt her eyes burn. She blinked quickly, her vision blurring over the letters. It wasn't just praise, it was understanding. Every word felt like a recognition of something she had almost forgotten about herself. Then came the line that made her hands fall still. "You kept standards alive in a world that often rewards shortcuts." She read it again slowly, whispering the words aloud. "You kept standards alive." It hit her harder than she expected. For years, she'd watched the industry change training sessions, shortened, flights packed tighter, service expectations rising, while appreciation dwindled. She'd wondered if anyone still cared about doing things the right way. Now, here was someone of all people telling her it still mattered. At the bottom of the letter was a simple signature. "With respect, Keanu Reeves." Her breath caught. Rachel set the letter down gently, afraid that if she blinked too long, it might disappear like a dream. The handwriting was unmistakably real, slanted but firm, every loop and curve deliberate. She touched the paper lightly, tracing the signature as if to convince herself it truly existed. She'd received plenty of thank yous over the years from passengers, but none of them felt like this. They were usually hurried notes scribbled on napkins, polite gestures that faded as quickly as they came. This was different. This letter felt personal, earnest, in a way that went beyond simple gratitude. After a deep breath, she turned her attention to the cream-colored card that had been tucked behind the letter. It bore the embossed logo of the Arch Foundation. Beneath it, in smaller letters, it read, "Flight Crew Integrity Scholarship in recognition of excellence in safety and professional conduct." Her eyes widened as she read the next line.
This certificate entitles Rachel Miller to a full scholarship for advanced flight safety and leadership training, sponsored by the Arch Foundation. Her hand flew to her mouth. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. It wasn't the value of the scholarship that overwhelmed her. It was what it represented. Someone had noticed. Someone had looked beyond her uniform, beyond the surface of a service role, and seen the heart behind it. She read the next line, written in Keanu's handwriting below the printed text. I believe that good people make the sky safer. I'd like you to continue leading by example. Please accept this as my small way of saying thank you for protecting strangers, even when no one was watching. Rachel sat there in stunned silence, staring at the letter and the voucher side by side. The morning light filtered through her window, casting soft gold across the table. The quiet hum of her refrigerator filled the room, grounding her in the moment. She thought back to the first time she'd ever stepped into a plane as crew. A young woman barely out of training, clutching her manual like a lifeline. She'd been nervous, but proud. Back then, she'd believed in everything the job stood for: discipline, safety, and care. Somewhere along the years, that spark had dimmed. But now, thanks to this letter, it burned again. She whispered to herself, "He didn't just thank me. He believed in me." Her voice cracked, but the tears this time weren't from fear or exhaustion. They were from something far deeper: recognition. Rachel placed the letter back into its envelope and sat in silence for several minutes, letting the words sink in. The world outside was still and quiet, the kind of morning where everything felt possible again. She reached for her phone, opened her notes app, and typed just one line: keep standards alive. She didn't need to post about it, didn't need to tell anyone right away. Some gestures were meant to be held close, like a secret reminder of goodness in a world that often forgot what it looked like. As she folded the letter once more, she caught the last line again, written in neat cursive. The world needs more people like you in the sky. Her throat tightened as she whispered, and people like you on the ground. She placed the envelope on her mantel beside an old photo from her first flight crew graduation. The two moments, then and now, seemed to meet across time, forming a quiet circle of meaning. Outside her window, a plane ascended into the morning light. She watched it disappear into the clouds, smiling through her tears. For the first time in years, Rachel felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, the world around Rachel had changed, but in the quietest, most meaningful ways. She still woke before dawn, still ironed her uniform with the same care, and still carried her leather-bound flight manual wherever she went. But now, instead of walking through the terminal as part of the crew, she walked the halls of the company's training center as its new head flight instructor for safety and standards. Her promotion had come quietly, without fanfare. Mr. Hargrove had called her into his office one morning, smiled in that rare, understated way of his, and said, "You've set an example we want others to follow. It's time you teach what you've lived." At first, she didn't know if she was ready. But standing now, before a classroom of fresh recruits, she realized she was exactly where she needed to be. The training room was bright, lined with posters of aircraft diagrams, turbulence protocols, and communication codes. A faint hum from the overhead projector filled the silence, as 20 young faces looked up at her with the kind of curiosity she remembered from her own early days. Rachel smiled, tapping her binder against the desk. "All right," she said, her voice steady but warm. "Let's talk about what safety really means. Because it's not just about knowing the rules, it's about having the courage to enforce them when it counts." A few trainees exchanged glances. Leaning forward, Rachel paced slowly in front of the whiteboard. "I once had a passenger who refused to fasten his seatbelt during turbulence," she began, her tone conversational. He was calm, polite, but distracted. I reminded him twice. The third time, I raised my voice. I told him that if he didn't comply, we'd have to land. The room grew quiet. She smiled faintly, remembering. It wasn't my best moment of diplomacy, but it was my best moment of duty. A hand went up in the front row. "What happened next?" a young trainee asked. Rachel paused for a beat. "Well,"
she said softly. Let's just say that passenger turned out to be someone very important. Someone who taught me as much about grace as I taught him about rules. The class laughed gently, intrigued but respectful. Rachel smiled, continuing. You'll face moments like that when doing the right thing doesn't feel easy. When you'll wonder if kindness and authority can coexist. I'm here to tell you, they can. And when they do, that's when this job becomes more than a job. That's when it becomes a calling. The trainees leaned in closer, their faces a mix of admiration and disbelief. Rachel could see herself in them, the same spark of determination, the same unspoken fear of making mistakes. She smiled, resting her hands on the desk. You see, she continued, in this profession, you'll meet all kinds of people. Some will test your patience, some will test your integrity, and sometimes, the person who tests both might end up teaching you something about yourself. A young woman near the back raised her hand. So what did you learn from him? Rachel took a moment before answering. That respect isn't about titles. It's about honesty. The moment you treat someone with genuine respect, even when correcting them, you build trust. And that trust is what keeps people safe at 30,000 feet. The classroom was silent again, thoughtful. She could tell the lesson was sinking in. Rachel clicked the remote, advancing the slideshow behind her. A photo of a plane flying through dense clouds appeared on the screen. That's how life feels sometimes, she said. Uncertain, turbulent. You can't see what's ahead, but you trust the instruments, the training, and your instincts. You hold steady. Because doing what's right doesn't depend on who's watching. It depends on who you are. The trainees nodded. One of them whispered, "That's powerful." Rachel smiled faintly. "That's aviation," she said simply. As the class ended, she dismissed the group and gathered her materials. A few trainees stayed behind, thanking her quietly. One of them saying, "That story, it kind of made me realize why I wanted to do this." Rachel's heart warmed. "Good," she said. "That's why I told it." When the room finally emptied, she stood by the back wall for a moment, looking at the framed letter that hung beside her instructor's certificate. The cream-colored paper was preserved behind glass, the ink still vivid. The final line, "The world needs more people like you in the sky," caught the light from the window, glowing faintly. Beside it hung a small photograph, a jet slicing through clouds at sunrise. She'd placed it there to remind herself of perspective, of how every flight was more than a routine. It was a responsibility, a connection, and sometimes a lesson waiting to unfold. She took a slow breath. In that quiet room, she felt the story come full circle, not because of recognition or promotion, but because she'd found her purpose again. Later that evening, as Rachel locked her office, she glanced once more at the framed letter and smiled. The hallway lights glowed softly, reflecting across the polished floor. Everything felt still, calm, earned. She remembered the panic of that flight, the tremor in her voice, the certainty that she had ruined her future. And now, that same moment had become the story she used to inspire others. Life had a way of turning turbulence into altitude. Before leaving, she whispered quietly, "Thank you, Mr. Reeves." She didn't need to tell her students who he was. It wasn't about celebrity or power. It was about integrity, the rare kind that made even the smallest choices matter. Outside, a jet took off into the twilight sky, its engines fading to a hum. Rachel watched its ascent until it disappeared beyond the clouds. She felt an ache in her chest, not of fear or regret, but of gratitude. Some encounters changed your career. Others changed your character. And this one, she knew, had done both. She turned off the lights, her reflection flickering briefly against the glass before vanishing, leaving behind a quiet legacy written in courage, humility, and a simple thank you. The ballroom shimmered under golden lights, crystal chandeliers scattering reflections across a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. It was the annual West Coast Aviation Charity Gala, an event Rachel had attended only once before as a guest of her company's training division. Tonight, though, she wasn't just attending. She was being recognized for her contributions to safety education and mentorship. Her name had been listed in the program as Rachel Miller, Head of Safety Instruction Inspiring Leadership in Aviation. She stood near the edge of the room, a glass of water in her hand, still getting used to being part of a world where she wasn't serving drinks, but being thanked for her work. The murmur of laughter and soft jazz filled the space. She glanced around, quietly proud but still humble, still the same woman who once worried every shift might be her last. Then the crowd shifted. A ripple of recognition passed through the room like a soft wave, and Rachel followed, everyone's gaze toward the entrance. There, walking in with quiet composure and an easy, unforced smile, was Keanu Reeves. For a moment, Rachel froze. Her heart gave a startled thump, her hand tightening around the glass. She hadn't seen him since that flight. In truth, she hadn't expected to ever see him again. The last she'd known of him was the letter, the one framed in her office, the one she read every time she needed to remind herself why integrity mattered. Keanu stopped near the registration table, shaking hands and greeting the organizers, polite as always, modestly trying to deflect the attention. Cameras flashed, but he didn't pose. He simply smiled at people, listening, thanking, moving gently through the room as though the fame around him was incidental, not defining. Rachel took a step back, unsure whether to approach him. She didn't want to interrupt, didn't want to make the encounter about herself. She was content just to see him again, to know the man, who had once turned her fear into faith, still carried the same calm presence. But then he saw her. Even across the crowd, his expression shifted, recognition flashing in his eyes, followed by genuine warmth. He excused himself from a small conversation and began walking toward her. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. People turned as he passed, the crowd subtly parting, curious but respectful. When he reached her, he smiled, that unmistakable smile, the kind that made everyone around him feel seen. "Still enforcing the rules, I hope?" he said. Rachel laughed softly, the sound half disbelief, half relief. "Always," she replied. Keanu nodded approvingly. "Good. The sky's safer because of you." For a moment, neither said anything more. They simply stood there, two people whose paths had crossed by accident and meaning, sharing a quiet acknowledgement of something deeper than celebrity or duty, something like respect. Rachel felt her throat tighten slightly as she met his gaze. "I didn't think you'd even remember me," she said with a shy smile. Keanu chuckled softly. "You'd be surprised what stays with you. That day, you reminded me that doing the right thing doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it just comes with turbulence." The words carried that same quiet weight he was known for, simple but full of truth. Rachel laughed gently, shaking her head. "I remember thinking I'd never work again." He smiled. "Funny how life turns out, isn't it? You enforced a rule, I learned a lesson, and now here we are, both a little better for it." They stood together as the host announced the evening's honorees. A few people glanced over curiously, whispering at the sight of Keanu Reeves chatting with the safety director. But he seemed unfazed, entirely focused on her words, as if the rest of the world had dimmed away. "Do you still fly much?" Rachel asked. "Whenever I can," Keanu said. "Mostly for causes that matter. The air feels different when you're not flying for yourself." She nodded, understanding instantly. "That's how I feel about teaching now," she said quietly. "It's not glamorous, but it feels like passing the torch, like keeping something alive." "That's purpose," Keanu said, his tone gentle but firm. "That's what keeps people grounded even up there in the clouds." A photographer passed by and hesitated, clearly debating whether to ask for a picture. Keanu caught his eye and nodded politely. "One photo," he said, turning back to Rachel. "If that's all right with you." She blinked in surprise. "Of course." The flash went off, capturing them both mid-laughter. It wasn't posed, it was real. After the photographer left, Rachel lowered her glass and said softly, "You know, that letter you sent me? It's on my wall." Keanu tilted his head, a faint blush touching his face. "Really? It reminds me that sometimes the smallest act of courage can change everything, that it's worth standing your ground, even when it feels like the world is watching." He smiled, that quiet,
contemplative smile that had disarmed audiences for decades. Then, it found the right home. The band began playing again. People were dancing now, conversation filling the air. But for Rachel, the noise faded. The moment felt suspended in its own stillness, a perfect landing after a long flight. As the gala continued, Keanu excused himself to greet other guests, but before leaving, he shook her hand once more. "Keep doing what you do," he said. "The sky and the people in it need that kind of courage." Rachel watched him walk away, blending back into the crowd as effortlessly as he always did. For a man who could command a room, his humility was what made him unforgettable. She turned toward the stage, where a speaker was thanking donors, the lights reflecting across her glass. Her reflection smiled faintly back at her. A woman, no longer defined by fear, but by conviction. A voice echoed softly in her memory. "You were right. Thank you for doing your job." The screen faded to black, and the closing words appeared. In a world where fame often demands exceptions, Keanu Reeves reminded everyone that humility and principle never go out of style. Then came the question to the viewers. What would you have done if you were Rachel? Have you ever met someone who surprised you with their kindness? And finally, the invitation. Like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories of character, courage, and compassion.